Imagine, imagine owning a physical grocery store where you possess this terrifying, invisible superpower.
A superpower, like X-ray vision or something?
Kind of, but for consumer data.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't just know how many people walk through the front doors today. You know exactly which aisle a specific customer walked down first.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is intense.
Right. And, they paused at the cereal, they picked up a specific box, stared at it for exactly 42 seconds, put it back, wandered over to the dairy section, and then, apparently frustrated, decided to leave through a side door.
That is an incredible amount of granular psychological data to have in the physical world.
Exactly. If you had that level of insight in reality,
Hmm.
you'd be an absolute retail god. I mean, you would know exactly where to put the high-margin items.
Yeah, and you'd know exactly which aisle is causing people to just give up and abandon their shopping carts.
Precisely. Well, today we are cracking open a foundational digital playbook to show you how the internet gave everyday people that exact superpower. Welcome to another deep dive.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. And for those of you listening, whether you're prepping for a huge strategy meeting, trying to understand the invisible architecture of the modern web, or you're just, insanely curious about how the digital economy actually functions beneath the surface, you are in the right place.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to dissect a really fascinating text. It's an informational ebook titled Internet Marketing Essentials for Newbies.
Now, a quick bit of context right out of the gate here. This text is essentially the ancient blueprint of the modern web.
Yeah, it really is a time capsule.
It was written in an era when concepts like pop-up ads and Yahoo directories were cutting edge.
Right. Which sounds so wild now.
Totally.
Right.
But we aren't here for a history lesson, and we certainly aren't here to sell you a vintage marketing course. What we're going to do is extract the underlying psychological mechanics and really the raw strategies outlined in this document.
Because the foundational DNA of how you capture attention, how you track human behavior, and monetize a digital audience, that hasn't changed at all.
Not one bit. The tools have evolved into complex algorithms, sure, but the psychology, it's identical.
The underlying architecture described in this text is what built the modern digital economy. What we're going to uncover today is the anatomy of a massive, invisible infrastructure.
Yeah, we're exploring that initial shockwave of democratization, that moment when
That's right.
technology completely leveled the playing field.
It allowed a person sitting in their living room to go head-to-head with multi-million-dollar conglomerates. I mean, the text frames the internet not just as a place to share information, but as a modern-day gold rush.
A gold rush. That's
Yeah.
the perfect term for it.
Literally asks the reader right in the introduction, do you want to turn your idea into gold?
Okay, let's unpack this because
Yeah.
usually we think of the internet in a very casual way. For you, the listener, maybe it's just a utility.
Right, it's where you check the weather.
Exactly. You check the weather, read the news, or fall down a rabbit hole of funny videos to decompress after work. But this source drops a massive hook by revealing this highly structured, fiercely competitive, income-generating planet operating right under our thumbs.
It positions the internet as a revolutionary marketing tool by making a really specific comparison to traditional media.
Let's talk about that comparison, because the author makes a brilliant economic observation about the bundling of media.
Yeah, the text states that the internet bundles the impact of traditional journalism with the broad appeal of broadcasting and multimedia. And it does all of this at a mere fraction of the traditional costs.
Which is mind-blowing when you actually break down the mechanics of what that meant historically. The shift is staggering.
Think about the capital required to have the impact of journalism in the 20th century.
You needed a literal printing press.
Right. A printing press, tons of physical paper, a whole fleet of delivery trucks, and a distribution network of newsstands.
And if you wanted the appeal of broadcasting, the barrier to entry was even higher.
Oh, absolutely. You needed to build a television or radio studio, purchase incredibly expensive transmitting equipment, and navigate a labyrinth of federal regulations just to get an FCC license to broadcast on a specific frequency.
It was an exclusive club. You couldn't just decide on a Tuesday that you wanted to be a broadcaster.
Not at all. You had to be a millionaire or backed by millionaires just to turn the microphone on.
Precisely. The capital requirements acted as a massive gatekeeper. And what this text is pointing out is that the internet took all of those capabilities, global distribution, multimedia broadcasting, instant publishing, packaged them together into a single digital infrastructure, and handed the keys to anyone with a dial-up connection and a basic computer.
The barrier to entry fundamentally shifted from financial capital to intellectual and creative capital.
That is a wild concept to really internalize. It's like handing every single person on Earth their own global broadcasting tower.
It is, and the text makes a huge point about this being the great equalizer. It highlights that in this new digital space, the sheer size of a business's bank account matters far less than the creativity of its strategy.
Let's visualize this. In the physical world, a tiny, home-based lemonade stand looks exactly like what it is.
A couple of wooden crates on a sidewalk?
Right. Wooden crates and a hand-painted cardboard sign. It cannot possibly compete with a massive neon-lit, glass-fronted corporate coffee shop across the street. The optics alone dictate who the consumer trusts.
But in this digital metropolis, if the person running that lemonade stand has a brilliant strategy, their digital storefront can look just as professional.
It can load just as fast and reach just as many people as the corporate giant.
Because the screen acts as the ultimate equalizer of perception. On a monitor, a corporate giant and a home-based business take up the exact same amount of physical space, a browser window.
That's such a good point. A browser window is the great leveler.
It is no longer about who has the most money to buy prime real estate on Fifth Avenue. It is about who can best navigate the digital metropolis to capture attention.
But here's where I want to push back a little bit. When we talk about internet marketing in this context, isn't that really just a dressed-up term for building a website?
How do you mean?
Like, I build a page, I list my digital lemonade for sale, and boom, I'm marketing. I'm a broadcaster.
That is the exact misconception the source addresses head-on. It explicitly warns newbies that internet marketing is absolutely not just about building websites.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If we stick to your metropolis analogy, building the website is merely acquiring the digital real estate. It's pouring the concrete and putting up the walls.
Okay, I'm with you.
But a beautiful building in the middle of a desert does absolutely nothing if no one knows it exists and there are no roads leading to it.
Right. Nobody's just randomly walking through the desert hoping to find lemonade.
Exactly. The text argues that real internet marketing is an entire living ecosystem. It encompasses search engine optimization, relentless traffic generation, and deliberate brand building.
So it's not just a billboard, it's the whole highway system.
It's about using a bundled strategy to create an identity and pull people toward that concrete foundation. The reason small-time proprietors can stay alive and compete is that they can master the mechanics of this ecosystem faster than a slow-moving corporation.
Agility. They outmaneuver the big players not by outspending them on digital real estate, but by outsmarting them in how they weave the invisible strings that pull consumers to their site.
Precisely. So the creativity isn't just in having a nice-looking graphic design on your homepage.
The creativity is the strategy of the ecosystem itself.
Yeah.
But intellectual capital and a clever strategy are useless in a vacuum. I mean, a beautiful storefront in a digital ghost town still goes bankrupt. You need foot traffic.
Yes, you do.
And this text treats foot traffic differently than a physical store does. It treats it as literal stock data.
The source is emphatic that web traffic is not a vanity metric. It's not just a little digital counter at the bottom of a web page that spins to make the site owner feel popular.
Oh man, those old visitor counters. I remember those.
Right. But traffic is strictly monitored via bandwidth, and it forms the absolute foundation for any advertising revenue. It is the core currency of the realm.
Let's talk about the mechanics of bandwidth for a second, because the text mentions it specifically. Why was bandwidth such a critical metric to monitor back then?
Well, in the foundational days of the web, hosting a website wasn't an unlimited data scenario like we often see today.
It was metered, right?
Exactly. When a user visited your site, their computer had to download your HTML files, your images, and your text from your server. That data transfer is bandwidth. Site owners paid for that data transfer.
Ouch. So tracking traffic wasn't just about measuring success. It was a strict matter of cost management.
It really was. If you built a page with massive unoptimized images and it suddenly got popular, the bandwidth costs could literally bankrupt you.
Or your hosting provider would just shut your site down completely.
Yep. So monitoring traffic wasn't a luxury. It was the baseline requirement for keeping the lights on.
That adds a whole new layer of stress to the gold rush. I mean, you want people to visit, but if too many visit the wrong way, you crash.
Which explains why the text dives so deeply into the granular data that traffic provides. It refers to this data almost as a form of stock information for the business.
And the level of detail it goes into is staggering. It's tracking the average duration of visits, the exact number of pages viewed per visit, and the specific popularity of individual pages.
What's fascinating here is the psychological profiling hidden within that raw data. The text breaks down several key metrics. First, it looks at what it calls top paths.
Top paths, what exactly is that?
This is the exact sequence of clicks a visitor makes from their entry point all the way to their exit.
This goes back to my grocery store analogy from the beginning. Knowing the top path is knowing exactly which aisles they walk down and in what order.
And by knowing that, a marketer can map human curiosity. If 90% of your visitors read an article on page A and then immediately click a link to page B, you have just learned a profound truth about what naturally interests your demographic.
That makes total sense. You can then place your most important products or affiliate links squarely on that path.
Exactly. The text also mentions tracking the busiest times and days.
And there's a fun, incredibly practical fact from the text regarding those busy times. It dictates exactly when you should not do site maintenance.
Oh, right.
If your data shows your traffic spikes on Tuesday evenings, you don't take your servers offline for an update on Tuesday at 6 p.m. It sounds obvious now, but back then, it was a revelation that you could see your global rush hour in real time.
The text also emphasizes two other critical metrics: entry pages and exit pages. An entry page is simply where a user first lands on your site.
It might not be your homepage, right? It might be a specific article they found via a search engine.
Right. But the exit page is perhaps the most vital piece of psychological data. The exit page is the exact location where the user decided they were done with you.
The moment they abandoned the shopping cart and walked out the side door.
Yes. By analyzing exit pages, a marketer can reverse engineer human boredom or frustration.
So if one specific page is consistently the last thing people see before they leave your site,
That page is broken. Perhaps the content is dull, perhaps the link is dead, or perhaps the page takes too long to load and consumes too much bandwidth.
whatever the reason, it is actively driving people away.
Conversely, if you analyze your refers, the external sites that are linking to you and sending you traffic, you learn who your allies are in the digital metropolis.
The text even mentions paid tools that professionals use to gather this data, like Alexa Internet. And for you listening, we aren't talking about the smart speaker that turns on your living room lights.
No, Alexa Internet was an early, fascinating piece of web architecture. It was essentially a browser toolbar that users installed.
A toolbar? Wow.
Yeah, and it provided them with information about the sites they were visiting. But in exchange, it sent their browsing data back to Alexa.
So it was an early form of crowdsourced analytics. Long before massive platforms dominated web analytics with invisible tracking pixels, tools like Alexa allowed savvy marketers to peek at the behavioral data of the broader internet, not just their own servers.
It was how you spied on the competition's traffic.
That is wild. So you have this godlike analytical power over whoever walks through the door. You can read their minds through their clicks, but the problem is getting them to walk through the door in the first place.
Right, you can't analyze an empty room.
Exactly. Knowing your exit page is useless if you don't have any entry pages firing. How did a home-based operation actually open the floodgates back in the foundational days of the web?
The source outlines several specific mechanical methods for generating that initial surge of traffic. First, it points to placement on search engines, specifically calling out giants of the era like Google and Yahoo.
And it also mentions utilizing pop-up ads, though it cautions that these options generally cost money.
Let's pause on the search engine piece, because mentioning Yahoo and Google in the same breath really dates the text. But it also highlights a massive transition in how the internet worked.
It represents a critical paradigm shift, because in the early days, Yahoo functioned largely as a human-curated directory.
Yes, exactly. If you want it to be found, you literally submitted your website to a category, and a human being reviewed it and listed it.
But Google introduced a completely different mechanism based on algorithmic crawling and link analysis. Google didn't care what category you said you belonged in, it cared who was linking to you.
And that brings us to the cheapest, most fundamental method of generating traffic that the text highlights: building links with related sites.
The text specifically mentions a strategy of contributing to free article sites. It uses the example of ezinarticles.com, right? In exchange for a clickable URL back to your own site. That's the one. What is the actual mechanism at play here? Why did writing a free article for someone else help your business?
This is the birth of what we now call inbound marketing and off-page SEO. The mechanism was twofold. First, there was direct referral traffic.
Okay, so you write an article.
Right, you write a 500-word article about, say, training a golden retriever. You submit it to an article directory like Essinarticles.com, which already has thousands of daily readers.
Got it.
At the bottom of your article, you include a resource box that says, "For more dog training tips, visit my website," with a hyperlink. A percentage of people who read the article will click that link.
You have just siphoned traffic from a larger site. It's like being a guest on a massive talk show to plug your new book.
Precisely. But the second and far more powerful mechanism was how search engines like Google viewed that link.
How so?
Google's algorithm essentially treated a hyperlink from one site to another as a vote of confidence. If a massive site links to your tiny home-based dog training site, Google's algorithm assumes your site must be relevant and authoritative.
So the more of these external links you build, the higher your site would rank when someone searched for dog training.
Exactly.
This changes my entire perspective on link building. I used to think of it as just, leaving digital flyers on other people's windshields.
But it's actually a reputation system.
It's like getting a celebrity to co-sign your restaurant. If enough celebrities are seen eating there, suddenly everyone wants a reservation. And the search engines are the ones handing out the reservations.
The author describes this as a deeply symbiotic relationship. When you are starting out, you have zero reputation and zero traffic. You have to act as a client.
You borrow authority from bigger established sites by contributing content.
But the ultimate goal of the digital blueprint is to grow your own site's authority so large that the dynamic eventually flips. You become the host.
Newer sites come to you begging to write articles for your site just so they can get a link from you. The text notes that eventually you can even charge people for the privilege of borrowing your traffic.
It's the circle of digital life. But the text is very strict about the rules for actually keeping this traffic once you get it.
Yeah, it stresses that this cannot happen overnight.
Right.
It explicitly says that the content you create must have substance.
It needs to appeal to a wide variety of people, and ideally, it needs to be timeless. You can't just throw up poorly written garbage and expect the reputation system to reward you.
This is where the tension between short-term tactics and long-term sustainability emerges, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you are solely relying on spamming thousands of links across the web without producing genuinely timeless, universally appealing content on your own site, your traffic funnel will eventually collapse.
The search engines became smarter, and users certainly aren't foolish.
Right, the audience isn't stupid. They can tell when a link leads to a shiny, informative city versus a digital dump filled with ads.
And once you have that solid traffic, the text moves into how you actually monetize it. It discusses affiliate marketing, describing it as offering reviews of other products and earning a commission on the sale.
It also mentions direct advertising and utilizing SEO to highlight keywords that lead to those affiliated sites.
The mechanics of affiliate marketing rely entirely on the trust generated by that substance the text demands. I mean, if you write a detailed, highly substantive review of a digital camera and the reader trusts your expertise, they will click your affiliate link to buy it.
But if your review is just a thinly veiled advertisement with no real insight, there is no trust and therefore no commission.
So the transition from just getting raw clicks to actually building a trusted transactional relationship brings us right into the heart of commerce.
Yeah.
It's clear that selling things, whether your own products or someone else's for a commission, is the end game here.
Definitely.
Which naturally leads us to ask, once you have the traffic and the trust, what are the operational rules for actually running the store?
Well, the text dedicates a significant section to what it calls the pillars of e-commerce and e-retailing. It paints e-commerce as a massive paradigm shift because it completely removes the overhead of physical boutique space.
You don't need a commercial lease, you don't pay for heating, physical security, or a literal cash register.
It divides this new commerce into three facets: e-retailing, which are essentially virtual malls; market research, which relies heavily on the web traffic data we just discussed; and electronic promotion.
Let's dive into the operational mindset required for this, because the text outlines 10 specific tips for success in e-retailing. We aren't going to list all 10 because no one wants to listen to a textbook.
Right.
But I want to zero in on a few that highlight a really fascinating paradox. The text lists continuous improvement and embracing technological updates as absolute necessities, but it also emphasizes respecting expertise, which it defines as knowing when to hire freelance managers.
If we look closely at those specific pillars, they present a profound challenge for the solo entrepreneur. On one hand, you must be incredibly agile.
Because the technological landscape of the internet shifts rapidly.
If a new search engine algorithm rolls out or a new method of processing payments becomes the standard and you don't embrace that update, your business becomes obsolete overnight. You have to be willing to pivot your entire operational model at a moment's notice.
But on the other hand, no single human being can be an expert in web design, server maintenance, copywriting, behavioral psychology, and tax law all at the same time.
Precisely. And that is where the humility comes in. The text strongly advises hiring freelance business managers, coders, and advisors to formulate strategies if you have the funds.
It is a stark acknowledgement that sheer willpower and passion aren't always enough to survive the digital metropolis.
Sometimes agility means recognizing your own technical limitations and buying the expertise you lack to keep the machine running.
Agility versus humility. It's a tightrope walk. But there is another pillar here that I really want to debate.
Oh, which one?
Tip number 9 is fair play and honesty. The text asserts that bad behavior can never produce a good outcome in the long run, and that you need to be honest to earn trusting, repeat customers.
It frames honesty as a core requirement for longevity.
But wait, earlier in the text, when discussing electronic promotion, it gets surprisingly blunt. It openly talks about manual promotion and specifically mentions sending out unsolicited newsletters to prospects.
Right, the junk mail section.
It literally uses the phrase often looked at as junks. It acknowledges that a core strategy of e-commerce is basically sending digital junk mail spam, but defends it by saying it is never wrong to try because it might make a sale.
That is quite the contradiction.
That is completely hypocritical. Does fair play actually win in this faceless digital world? Or are the honest players just getting crushed by the spammers?
The author is being relentlessly, almost brutally pragmatic here, and it does create a friction in the text. You have to view this through the lens of early internet marketing, where the rules of engagement were still being written.
So the endorsement of unsolicited newsletters is a short-term tactical play.
The logic is a pure numbers game. If you send an email to 10,000 people and 99% hate it and view it as junk, but 1% buys your product, you made a profit for virtually zero distribution cost.
But if spamming works mathematically, why preach fair play at all? Aren't you just putting yourself at a disadvantage by playing nice?
It works for a quick dollar, yes. But the text pivots to fair play when discussing the ultimate goal, the surviving, thriving enterprise. Let's look at the mechanics of an email blast.
Okay.
You might get that 1% to buy today, but the 99% who are annoyed, they hit the spam button. When enough people do that, the major email providers like Yahoo or Hotmail back then blacklist your server's IP address.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, none of your emails go through, not even to the people who actually want them. You have burned your own digital infrastructure.
Okay, that makes sense. So the anonymity of the internet is a shield that lets you get away with bad behavior once, but the infrastructure itself has a memory.
Exactly. The text argues that your brand of service speaks for your image. In the digital space, reputation can be destroyed infinitely faster than it can be built, usually through public forums or review sites.
If you trick someone, they will never return, and they will loudly warn others.
Therefore, fair play isn't presented by the author as a high-minded moral imperative. It is presented as a strict business utility. Honesty is the only mathematically sustainable strategy for repeat business.
Honesty as a business utility. You can burn a bridge for warmth, but then you're stuck on the island. That is a brilliant way to resolve the contradiction.
It really is.
So selling physical goods or standard services through e-retailing requires this ruthless pragmatism. But physical goods are one thing. What if the product you are selling is just you?
Yeah.
Your thoughts. Does the same operational math apply to a diary?
This brings us to a massive section of the text, the blogosphere.
The source approaches the blog world with a very clear, almost clinical dichotomy.
It divides the entire sphere of blogging into two distinct factions. On one side, you have writing for personal advancement. This is the classic, anonymous, liberating digital diary.
The text describes this as a space where people can express their deepest thoughts without revealing their real-world identities, right?
Yes, often aiming to be an instrument of change or simply to find community with others going through similar situations.
It's the digital version of pouring your heart out in a journal, but hoping maybe one other person across the globe reads it and feels less alone. It's a purely therapeutic, community-driven endeavor.
There are no rules, no bandwidth concerns, just raw expression.
But then, the text pivots hard to the other faction, writing for profit. And the rules for this faction are incredibly strict, almost suffocatingly so.
The text states that a professional blogger must maintain an extreme focus on a narrow topic. It uses a very stark, memorable example to illustrate this point.
The cat example.
Yes. It warns that a blog focused on a drug rehabilitation center cannot suddenly feature a post about the author's pet cat dying.
Which sounds harsh, but the logic here is structural.
Exactly. The audience, and more importantly, the advertisers paying for space on that page, are there for a highly specific contextual reason. Any deviation from that core topic is considered a useless entry that dilutes the brand, confuses search engine algorithms, and alienates the target demographic.
That cat example really stuck with me. Let me give you an analogy to separate these two worlds. Writing a personal blog is like singing in the shower. You can sing whatever song you want, you can change the key halfway through, you can forget the lyrics, and it's perfectly fine because it's purely for your own joy and release.
I like that analogy.
But writing a professional blog, according to the strict rules of this text, is like auditioning for a Broadway musical every single day. The audience is ruthless, the casting directors, which are the advertisers, are watching your every move, and if you miss a single note or suddenly start singing a country song during a jazz routine, they just leave.
They walk out of the theater and never come back.
Exactly.
That Broadway audition analogy perfectly captures the intense psychological pressure the text describes in its section titled Blog Writing 101. The source lays out highly specific, rigid parameters for how one must write.
Give us some of those parameters.
For instance, it dictates that the length of a post must strictly be between 400 to 1,000 words.
Why that specific length? Why not a massive essay?
Because the author understood the shifting nature of digital consumption. The text colorfully notes that readers are not couchies who will stare at a long screen indefinitely.
Couchies. I love that term. It's such an early 2000s way of describing what we now know as doom scrolling or the fractured digital attention span.
It implies that reading on a screen is an active, impatient posture, not a relaxed, leaning back in an armchair experience.
Precisely. You have a very limited window to make your point before the user clicks that dreaded exit page we talked about earlier.
To survive this impatient environment, the text demands concise phrases, absolutely perfect English grammar, credible facts, catchy titles, and eye-pleasing graphics.
The tolerance for error is practically zero. I mean, if your grammar is poor, your authority vanishes, and your affiliate links go unclicked.
And to actually earn money from this highly pressured writing, the text suggests starting small. It talks about text link ads, hosting community forums to drive repeat visitors.
And it even advises initially writing for existing blog networks. Basically, it suggests getting a job as a staff writer for someone else's larger site to learn the brutal ropes of the trade before you try to fly solo and pay for your own bandwidth.
What is most striking about this section is how heavily the text analyzes the psychological toll of the endeavor. It brings up a crucial factor for survival: the absolute necessity of patience.
The empty room.
Yes, the source explicitly warns that if you cannot stand writing patiently every day to an empty room, especially during those first 6 months when the search engines haven't indexed you and no one seems to be taking notice, you will fail.
You have to be willing to endure the silence of the digital void. Furthermore, it offers a piece of strategic advice that seems totally counterintuitive for a section titled Writing Blogs for Profit.
It says you must prioritize substance first, money later.
Right. If the whole point is to turn your idea into gold, why hide the profit motive? Why not just plaster the page with ads on day one?
Because the mechanism of trust we discussed earlier is incredibly fragile. The text points out that internet users have developed a highly tuned radar for separating genuine, helpful information from hollow advertising.
If you write with the sole, immediate intention of making $1, your writing will mechanically reflect that. It will feel compromised.
It will read like a sales pitch rather than a resource. The text argues that a mind constantly focused on extracting money becomes corrupted in its output.
To actually attract the dollars, you first have to provide premium, irresistible content that builds genuine authority. The money is a byproduct of the substance. It cannot be the primary engine.
Substance first, money later. Because the audience can smell desperation through the screen.
If you don't love the sound of your own voice, you'll stop singing long before the audience ever arrives to buy a ticket.
That's a great way to put it.
All of this sounds incredibly empowering. I mean, we've talked about equalizing the playing field, reverse engineering human behavior with traffic data, and building empires of trust through blogging.
The source paints a picture of massive potential.
But there is a massive shadow side to this gold rush that the text spends a lot of time warning the newbie about. It is time for the reality check.
The source is very careful to balance its soaring optimism with a stark, unvarnished outline of the disadvantages. It acknowledges the massive advantages first. It is highly economical compared to leasing a brick-and-mortar store.
It instantly reaches a universal global audience. It gathers demographic data without needing to hire a physical research team.
And it allows for a very comfortable home-based lifestyle. It pitches digital marketing as the fastest-growing industry in the world.
But then it drops the hammer on the hidden costs. And for anyone listening who has ever thought about starting a side hustle, this is the reality check you need. The internet is constantly touted as cheap or free, but the source explicitly details how the operational costs snowball incredibly fast.
The text highlights the steep upfront investments required just to participate. You need top-of-the-line hardware. A standard off-the-shelf computer might not have the processing power to handle complex web design software or manage large databases.
You need a high-speed internet connection, which, at the time this text was written, was a premium utility compared to standard dial-up.
You have to pay for professional web design costs if you lack the expertise, and you have to fund online distribution and ad campaigns just to get the initial snowball rolling.
Hilariously and very meta, it even points out that you have to spend money on pricey ebooks just to educate yourself on how to do all of this. You have to buy the map before you can dig for the gold.
It is a very self-aware moment in the text. But beyond the hard financial costs, the source outlines the existential threats to an online business. The primary threat is the sheer scale of global competition.
Let's expand on that because it's a terrifying concept. In the physical world, if you open a boutique selling sleek, handmade handbags, your competition is the other 3 boutiques in your town, maybe the local department store.
Right.
But the text points out that on the internet, you are not competing locally. You are competing against every single person on planet Earth who has an internet connection and a sewing machine.
The scale of the digital metropolis works against you just as much as it works for you. Your entry barriers are low, but so are everyone else's.
On top of that staggering competition, there are the relentless technological updates we discussed earlier.
The text warns that the internet moves at such a blistering pace that if you lose the physical or mental stamina to keep updating your strategies, learning new software, and adapting to new search algorithms, you will be left behind instantly.
It is a treadmill that never stops.
Exactly.
So, knowing all that, let me ask the question the text seems to be begging. Is the home-based dream actually a trap? I mean, it sounds amazing to work from your couch in your pajamas, being your own boss.
It does.
But if you are constantly pouring money into server costs, fighting off millions of global competitors for a sliver of attention, and running on a technological treadmill that speeds up every month, are you really free? Or are you just tethered to a much more demanding, invisible boss?
The text suggests that it is a calculated risk. It only becomes a trap if you enter it blindly, believing the myth that the internet is a magical ATM. But the most significant hurdle the text identifies isn't the financial cost or the relentless competition.
What is it then?
It's the fundamental issue of consumer trust and security. The source discusses the pervasive presence of evil minds scamming unassuming victims online.
Ah, the scammers.
Yes, and this creates a fascinating structural paradox when you view the text as a whole. Earlier, we discussed how the anonymity of the internet makes personal blogging so liberating, the ability to hide your identity and express yourself freely.
Right.
But that exact same feature of anonymity is what makes consumers highly suspicious of e-commerce. To the consumer, you are a faceless entity, hiding behind a screen, asking them to type in their credit card number.
Wow. Anonymity is a superpower for expression, but it is a massive structural liability for commerce.
Exactly. The text forces the reader to face the reality that a single bad experience with an online scammer makes a consumer inherently suspicious of every other digital storefront they encounter.
As a legitimate business owner, you are paying the penalty for the scammer's actions.
You have to work twice as hard, provide twice as much substance, and build an ironclad reputation just to prove you are a real human being who will actually deliver the product.
The text perfectly balances the wild gold rush optimism with the cold reality that the default state of the digital consumer is suspicion.
Which means, if you are going to survive all of this, the compounding costs, the global competition, the technological treadmill, and the default suspicion of the consumer, you cannot just wing it.
You need a flawless, mechanically sound plan. And that brings us to the culmination of the text, the master blueprint.
The final chapter of the source acts as a synthesis of everything that came before it. It provides a definitive step-by-step game plan for the newbie, And the sequence of this blueprint is absolutely rigid.
Walk us through the mechanics of this blueprint. What is the actual process?
Step 1, define exact, clear goals. Are you trying to sell a physical product, generate affiliate revenue, or build a personal brand?
Okay, that makes sense.
Step 2, determine the target audience. Who exactly are they? What are their demographics? What are their specific behaviors and psychological needs?
And then?
Step 3 is where the real work begins. Conduct meticulous market research.
Let's dig into that meticulous market research because that phrase gets thrown around a lot. Mechanically, what did that actually look like for a newbie following this text?
It meant deeply analyzing the competition. You wouldn't just look at a competitor's website. You would view the page source code to see what meta keywords they were targeting.
Oh, wow. Sneaky.
You would read niche forums to see what specific questions people were asking that weren't being answered. You would use keyword research tools like Overture, which was popular at the time, to see the exact numerical search volume for specific phrases.
You are looking for gaps in the digital metropolis where demand exists but supply is weak.
Exactly. Step 4. Analyze all of that acquired data to map out the potential profitability of your venture. And finally, step 5. Formulate a comprehensive strategy.
And the most critical part of that sequence is that all 5 steps must be completed before taking the plunge. You don't build the website and then figure out who you are selling to. You figure out the entire mathematical universe of your business, you find the gap in the market, and then you pour the digital concrete.
Exactly. But even with all of that meticulous data-driven planning, the source provides an ultimate, very human safety net.
What's that?
It states that the foundational element of the entire enterprise must be passion. It advises that you must start with something you genuinely care about. If you hate writing, do not start a professional blog, no matter how profitable your keyword research says it might be.
If you love the thrill of buying and selling, focus your energy on online shopping platforms or auction sites.
Exactly.
I love this because the text isn't using the word passion as a fluffy, feel-good buzzword. It isn't saying, follow your bliss and the universe will provide. It's presenting passion as a strict, cold business utility.
It is the fuel required for survival. As we discussed with the blogosphere, the timeline for success is long. The wait for your first dollar, your first inbound link, your first organic search ranking, it can be agonizingly slow.
If you do not have a genuine passion for the underlying topic, you will simply quit long before your meticulous strategy ever has a mathematical chance to pay off.
Passion is the mechanism that sustains the necessary patience.
It's the only way to survive the empty room. And there is one quote from this blueprint section that I really want to highlight, because I think it sums up the entire philosophy of the text. The author writes, "The good fortune of Peter cannot be the same for you."
That line is the core thesis of the digital economy. What the author means is that blindly copying someone else's successful strategy will mathematically result in failure. Peter might have made a fortune selling a highly specific piece of software using a specific affiliate method.
But if you look at Peter's success and simply duplicate his website and his keywords, you will drown.
Why? If the strategy works, why wouldn't it work twice?
Because the ecosystem has already absorbed Peter. He already has the inbound links, he already has the search engine authority, and he has already captured the target audience.
True digital marketing requires the development of a bespoke strategy. It must be based on your own rigorous, original market data, your own unique goals, and your own specific passions.
It demands original thought applied to structural mechanics. You can use Peter's understanding of bandwidth and traffic analysis, but you cannot use his map. You have to draw your own.
Beautifully said.
Okay, let's pull all of this together, because we have covered a massive amount of conceptual and mechanical ground in this deep dive. We started by looking at this foundational ebook, Internet Marketing Essentials for Newbies, and discovering that the early internet was far more than a casual space for sharing information.
Right, it was a revolutionary, equalizing marketplace that combined the massive power of global broadcasting with the low cost of a home internet connection.
We dissected the absolute lifeblood of that new marketplace, web traffic. We explored how tracking bandwidth wasn't just about managing server costs, but about gathering granular stock data.
We looked at the mechanics of psychological profiling tracking entry paths, identifying the exact moment of boredom on exit pages, and using tools like the Alexa toolbar to reverse engineer human behavior.
We talked about how to actually open the floodgates for that traffic through the reputation system of link building. We discussed how writing a simple article for a directory acted as a digital vote of confidence, signaling to search algorithms that you were an authority worth indexing.
We navigated the operational tightrope of e-commerce, wrestling with the paradox of needing both extreme agility to survive the technological treadmill and the humility to hire freelance experts when you hit your limits.
And we had that massive debate on the blunt reality of survival, how the text tactically endorses unsolicited junk mail, while ultimately concluding that honest fair play is the only mathematically sustainable strategy for keeping your server off a blacklist.
We analyzed the stark structural divide in the blogosphere between the liberating anonymous diary and the ruthlessly focused world of writing for profit.
We explored the concept of the couchies, the impatient scrolling audience that demands perfection, and the psychological endurance required to prioritize substance first, enduring the silence of the empty room until the trust is built and the money follows.
And finally, we faced the reality check. The hidden financial costs snowballing from hardware upgrades to pricey educational ebooks. The terrifying scope of competing against the entire globe.
And the constant draining battle to prove you aren't a scammer to a public whose default setting is suspicion. All of which requires a master blueprint rooted not in copying someone else's good fortune, but in a bespoke data-driven strategy fueled by genuine passion as a survival utility.
It is a comprehensive, unvarnished anatomy of the digital economy's foundational DNA. It reveals that the architecture hasn't changed.
Every single click you make today, every exit page you abandon, every affiliate link you trust, and every hyper-focused blog post you read is part of a highly orchestrated, fiercely competitive global marketplace that was designed decades ago.
Exactly. Whether you are just a casual web surfer who suddenly realizes why an ad perfectly targets a thought you had 5 minutes ago, or you are an entrepreneur looking to map your own route through the digital metropolis, this text proves that the digital ground we walk on is deeply intentionally engineered.
So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought inspired by everything we've unpacked from this ancient blueprint.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the internet is truly the great equalizer, providing every single person on Earth with the exact same tools to aggressively market their ideas, reverse engineer human psychology through data, and monetize attention at a global scale.
Yeah.
As the digital metropolis grows infinitely larger and the algorithms get infinitely smarter, does this endless ocean of targeted, hyper-optimized marketing eventually make raw, unmonetized, inefficient human connection the only true premium commodity left in the world?
That is quite the thought.
Thanks for joining us. Keep questioning what you click.